Karen Nash, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I'm trying to scooch back on my stool so my head is smaller like your head.
I can't tell how this
You're
is
doing
all new
great.
for me. I'm tech
Well,
challenged.
this is what I love about the podcast world, right? I get to meet incredible people. I get introduced to incredible people, and then incredible things happen. So, a couple of things that everybody should know about. One, you're a public defender in the Los Angeles County justice system. So, we're going to get into that, and that's going to be the backbone about what we talk about. But also, someone who's not tech savvy, not going to get approached by the press, but does the boots on the ground work, which is what I did when I was a spy. Like, I went out on the ground, like, is this working? Are there dangerous people? Where are they? Like, and actually talking to these people, you get the no shit reality of, you think this policy is going to work. However, there's all these other things that say that it doesn't. What do you all want to do to change that? Right. You're out there every day with a load of work to do. And I admire the hell out of you for doing it. But before we get to that, we got to talk about the fact that we both know and love Celeste Butler.
Yay. Hi, Celeste. Yeah, she's a Malonette, and I'm a Malonette. And for those of you who don't know what a Malonette is, shame on you. But we are the background singers in the fabulous Bob Malone band, along with Trisette Loosemore, who is another Malonette. So that's how I know Celeste. She's a singer, and so am I. So my life before law was music, and yeah. So Celeste and I are often the girls in the black dress making the the oohs and the moves.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah.
So that's how I know her. She's awesome.
Yeah, she is awesome. So we know her through John Robinson, who's a friend of the show and someone that we also adore. And he's like, you got to have Celeste on the show. So, hey, that's what we do around here. And these funny coincidences, they just happen all the time. I've 2 different times had a guest say, oh, that person lives across the street from me, and they've already been on the show. So you have like
only
these crazy
2 people in the world, or 6 people.
Yeah, right. And so that really proves that point.
Yeah.
And I love the music thing, and we should definitely have you come back on. And actually, what I really want to do is have you and Karen Rose on the show and talk about music, and maybe Karen's
I was just
wife.
going to say, how do we actually know each other? And it's through Karen. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I ever get named, it's going to be from her.
Yes, yeah, and Karen's awesome. I think the world of what she does and who she is and everything else, and it's just great to be able to be connected to people. We did a series a while back, and I actually haven't finished it because it just didn't get any reception, and I'm like, I can't justify this time. But it's called the Prison Chronicles, and I examined. Yeah, the lives of people that had been convicted for, murders, and then 3 strikes, and where these people were all sent away for what are supposed to be life sentences or 25 to life type things. And what I learned was that, the system chews up young black men. It puts them in society, puts them in these environments that none of us want as an outcome.
Yeah.
Where Shaka Singora was saying going to prison was a norm, getting shot was a norm. I don't want that. Like, he said, prison is an extension of my community. And that is like, no, there's no political statement in that. That is not what we want as a society, to have someone's life be like, yeah, prison's just an extension of where we like, oh, they're just over in prison right now. They'll be back later.
Well, and people have this false narrative about that as well, that they feel like, well, you're in prison only because you did something bad.
Right.
And while, I won't get into whether or not that's always true, because as we are starting to find out, it's not. But even if someone did do something bad, we want the system to treat everybody the same way. And I think, public defenders have been screaming this for decades, but now we actually have data that backs up that the system does disparately impact young black males more than any other group. It's black and brown people always, but specifically young black males. So from the start of their interaction with the criminal justice system, things are unfair. So from the initial decision of the police to stop, the decision to search, the decision to arrest, the decision then from the courts of whether or not to set bail, then the decision from the DA of what to charge, if anything, and then the plea, then the trial, if found guilty, then the sentence. All of those things have been found to be affected by race. And that just shouldn't be. And I'm not saying that means either that every single person involved in every step of that process was a racist. Like that's not what happens. It's more, although that exists, I think implicit bias is the big problem here. I think we saw this a lot. I remember that case. I'm trying to remember the name of the defendant now, and I can't. That case out of San Francisco where the defendant was a young white college student on some sort of sports team. I think maybe swimming. He committed some horrific stranger rape, and the judge didn't give him jail time. Now, if that had been one of my clients, they'd never see the light of day again, and I think what happened was that judge looked at that young man and saw in that young man himself as a young kid. And he actually said on the record he didn't want to ruin this kid's life by sending him to prison. And so that's what I'm talking about, where the kind of thing where I'm sure that judge wasn't a bigot, didn't have those kinds of feelings, didn't, outwardly express racism. It was just part of how you grow up and who you grew up with, the way you see people. So anyway, that case always sort of is a good example for me of what that looks like in real life.
Yeah, and we could get into the specifics of the case, but it's just one example of many where we do see, and the inmates all kind of agree. They're like, oh no, if you're black, this is way worse for you. One of the things that also is a problem is the socioeconomic difference, right? So
True.
some kid going to Stanford probably can afford a good lawyer. Maybe, that lawyer probably knows somebody. I mean, it's like there's so many advantages. And again, like the rights say that you're afforded an attorney, and that's what we all want. But I know from my own experience going through court, my public defender had no time for me other than to sit in front of the judge and then scramble whatever they could together. And I was afforded like a veteran's deference and go off to the side, and the court didn't want to even give me that. And they're like, well,
there's a lot of resistance. I mean, I have to respond about the public defender issue because,
please,
in just like in any profession, there are going to be. And can I use curse words on this show? I mean,
I fucking think so.
Okay, there's going to be assholes, right?
Right.
So there are public defenders who are assholes for sure, who don't care. But and I can only speak for my office. I mean, we have a really great group of dedicated, smart people who really care. But yeah, if you can run into someone who doesn't, and I imagine if you get somebody who's supposed to be your advocate and supposed to care about you and supposed to fight for you, and they just can't be bothered and they're looking at their watch for retirement. I mean, that makes everything even 50 times worse.
Let me be clear on what my critique was. Her stack of cases was bigger than she could maintain. It was like seeing a general practitioner doctor. Yeah, you're going to get 15 minutes and they're going to write down notes, but they're already mentally on to the next thing. Like there was no way.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Right.
A huge problem.
Completely understaffed.
And we're seeing a problem in our own office right now with that, with people, their felony trial caseloads are just through the roof. And I think a lot of that has to do with, there's more involved now. Like we're not just lawyers. We have to be social workers as well. We have to find programs for people. We have to do more. And we don't always have the resources. Now, I'm really fortunate that the unit I'm in, we have budgeting, that we have social workers, paralegals, we have support staff. So I can just do the law stuff. Like someone else is going to help me gather the records. And but this is all things that our trial attorneys, we don't have because of, there's just not a lot of money in public defendering. So like no one wants to give us money because everyone hates us. Like the clients hate us, the judges hate us, the DAs hate us, the board of supervisors. I'm teasing. They don't hate us, but you know what I'm saying. It's hard to get money. It's hard to make an argument to say, oh, let's put let's put more tax money into defending people who are charged with crime. I mean, nobody cares really until they learn about injustices, and then they start to care.
If your crime is in some way notable or made the news, I mean, it gets even harder if you don't have the resources. The other thing is, and this case kind of shocks me that we've never really figured this out, but the state can spend as much money as it wants coming after you. But there's not an equal balance in that money. Like if you're provided a public defender, it's like, hey, we spent $15 million, finding a way to put you in jail, legitimately or not. But and then you spent zero and had two people on your staff. I mean, it just blows me away that it can be so incongruous.
The resources aren't allocated fairly. And I think there was even a long time where DAs, my glasses are fogging up, where DAs were paid more than PDs. I'm like, how would you expect to get people who really believe in this and
Right.
defending the Constitution and want to do this work, and from top schools and getting the top minds, if you're not going to provide resources and pay them appropriately. So, but we're lucky in LA. I think we have one of the better public defender offices in the country.
Right.
So I feel very fortunate to do that
What
work.
and
But I'm sidelining now, talking about that. There's another thing I was going to bring up about, and I can't remember what I was going to say now.
well, we got plenty of things to chat
Too
about.
excited.
In LA County, they have that crazy case where there's a black dude he had a messed up life, and it looks like an awfully guilty guy many times, but he goes on, he's convicted of going on a rampage and killing a family. And there's a drop of his blood in this rampage in the house. But when you go to the evidence locker and you see the vial of his blood, someone's poked a needle through it, and you're like, okay, I mean, he might have done it. And there's all kinds of other evidence where you're like, this is not this dude.
It's a case I don't know about. Yeah.
It's crazy, right? And so this guy is still behind bars, or I don't know. He's one of those guys that's right on the edge, and like maybe he'll get released. Maybe he'll stay in jail the rest of his life. But there's all these crazy things that happen, and then you have something like evidence that looks like it's tampered. And here's a guy who goes on a rampage. Everybody's blood's everywhere, but only a tiny drop of his blood. And you're like, how can that be, right? These things don't make sense. So we look at.
Now I want to talk about junk science, and there's just like there's a million podcasts in this. I know what I was going to say. In response to your experience, I find that there is huge resistance on the bench to criminal justice reform, and I think a lot of it, and I'm obviously not saying every judge, every court,
right?
But a lot of the old timers, the judges who've been doing this a long time and came up in the tough on crime era, that's how they think. They think that public safety and tough on crime, those things equal, that you have to be tough on crime in a certain way. And it's just been shown to be wrong. So the resistance now, I really sort of get, it's very frustrating. But if you telling me that a judge didn't want to send you to diversion because it's just not the way they came up thinking, even though that diversion in the end is probably so much better for everybody, not just for the defendant, but for our society. Like, what do we want as a society, right? Do we want it, whenever this topic comes up, it's, the children, the safety of our community. Well, yeah, we all want that. I want that. I want to be able to walk down the street and be safe, but locking some kid up who's, just turned 18 because he has 3 strikes and you send him to prison for the rest of his life for stealing, a pair of shoes or something. I mean, that doesn't make anybody more safe. It just doesn't.
Right.
I mean, that's
on the other side of it. And the thing is like, as we collect this stuff, and the soft sciences are notorious for being tough at replication, right? We have studies, and you're like, man, I can't repeat this thing. Like I can't, which is like, one of the main things of scientific method. And then you look around
talking about data, when I'm saying science, it's not just the science of youthful offenders, which is, I think we all can kind of relate to that and know that we make stupid decisions when we're young and we're not as culpable and all of that. But I'm talking about the data of recidivism. Yeah. So the people that I represent who are getting out, they don't tend to reoffend. I think the rate is 4 or 5%. It's very low. And when they do reoffend, it's sort of lifestyle offenses, like they need to eat, or maybe they're using drugs or drinking again. So they're not they're not serious offenses. That's more what I meant with the science.
That seems to be a pretty sophisticated way of looking at it. I don't know how sophisticated courts are across the land, in their level of looking at these things. And there's also, from my limited and layperson study of these things, there's an age, and after which, like, recidivism just cliffs. It's just it doesn't. It's not that it doesn't exist, but you can look at someone and be like, I judge you to be safe to society because you're 42 years old now, and the chances of you wanting to come back here are pretty low.
Yep.
But these tend to still incarcerate people. On the other side of this, right, as we try to figure out the criminal justice system and how do we improve it, you're talking rural, urban, suburban, all these different places with different tolerances for things and how we do things. I know that if I walk around the city of LA or downtown San Francisco, or if I dare to go to Oakland, these are lawless places in a lot of the areas, right? And so that this is equated towards the DA, and like, what are they doing? Is the
Right.
sheriff doing their job? And all of these things tie together socially. It's like you don't want to be soft on crime, but you also want to figure out how to like put people in a rehabilitative slash penal system. And none of this makes any damn sense, Karen.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I mean, I can only speak to Los Angeles. I've seen a lot of really irresponsible reporting about our DA, Mr. Gascon, and people are blaming him for a situation that had nothing to do with him. In other words, the crime will be committed, and people will say, "Well, it's Mr. Gascon's fault because he's soft on crime." Um, and they say things like, "Oh, he's letting murderers out. He's opened the doors, the prisons, the jails," and that's just not true. I mean, it's factually not true. I work in the post-conviction unit, so I know exactly what it takes to get someone out.
Yeah.
And it certainly is not, they're not just letting people out of jail, especially not serious offenses. What they did do in Los Angeles is they stopped charging people with enhancements. So when people tell you, "Oh, this murderer is not getting the sentence he should," that's not true. What's happening is you commit a murder in Los Angeles, Gascon's DA's office will charge you, and their sentence will be 25 to life. Now in California, 25 to life probably means 45 to life, because honestly, our parole system, the way it is now, which does need some reform, but the way it is now, no one who's committed a murder gets out on their first try at parole.
Right.
So when people are saying murderers are just getting off lightly, that's not true. They're starting out with 25 to life. What they're not doing is charging these enhancements where you end up having someone serving more time on enhancements than they do for the actual crime they committed.
Right.
So I think that's what we're dealing with in Los Angeles. I don't know what's happening anywhere else.
Sure,
But
sure.
that's our situation, and I just don't believe the hype. Mr. Gascon is making us unsafe. Whereas I have heard the police tell people, "Oh, we're not going to come and respond to that call for help because Mr. Gascon won't prosecute them." To me, now that is making us unsafe. If the police are refusing to respond and then blaming it on the DA, I don't even know what to say to that. But that's anecdotal. I don't have proof of that. I've just had numerous people tell me that they've called the police and nobody showed up. And when they called again, they were told, "We're not coming because of the DA." And to me, that's political. That's gamesmanship, and it's scary. That's scary to me.
Well, and ultimately DAs and sheriffs have to get elected, and if DAs are saying clamp down on X, and the sheriff's like, "I'm not doing that," no,
Right.
that's
the same thing.
Yeah, so it's a challenge to do that, and it is a fact by someone's numbers that in places like San Francisco, Oakland, LA, the amount of violent crime is going up. And I don't know if the numbers are scary. Anytime the number goes up, you're like, "That's scary," but it may be a minor blip, right? Maybe it's due to COVID, maybe it's due to whatever. But it doesn't mean it's less scary. It doesn't mean it's less scary to go by, a homeless encampment, and wonder, what am I going to do? Nothing is going to happen.
Yeah.
400 times in a row. But this is LA, and at some point,
and
something is going to happen, right?
A huge problem with homelessness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's across the nation, but especially in LA. Anybody tells you we don't have that problem is not being honest.
Right.
But it's not the DA's fault that we have a homelessness problem. It's so many different things. And I think, to be fair, I think that a lot of our resentencing laws and a lot of the things that we've done to keep people out of jails and prisons, sometimes we put those people on the street with no support, and they're going to become homeless. Because if you combine that with Los Angeles and our housing prices, and then you add in mental illness and drug addiction, these are problems we have to address. And if we don't address them all, we're not going to get anywhere. So I sound like I'm running for mayor, don't I? Nash for mayor. I'm so unelectable.
But same, right? Like, there's no reason why I'm not in politics.
I know.
You probably have a colorful life. You're like,
for sure.
I mean, you've got a Rolling Stones shirt on, for crying out loud.
I can't do BS. I just can't. Well, occasionally I can, but not very well.
When we look at all of these horror stories, right? Like that serial season a couple of seasons ago where they were talking
I
about
haven't
like outs.
heard that podcast. I know that's embarrassing, but I don't know that podcast. I know
Well, it
of it.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
They were just talking about like how Ohio at this time was approaching this problem and how they would just scoop people up and process them through the mill. Everybody would
Ugh.
take their charge because it's everybody's happier when you just admit to something, even if you
Yeah.
didn't do it, pay a little bit of money, and then you move on. And then they start attaching enhancements or attaching penalties on like your license to force you
Hmm.
at some point to have to come in, so that you become more and more of an outlaw. And then the police are and I'm not picking on the police, but they become emboldened, and like the city is full of all of these criminals. This person's got 17 suspensions on their license, and this must
Right.
be axe murderer number one. I got into this loop in Illinois where they thought I didn't have insurance, even though I did. So you'd send proof, and the loop kept going. And I own part of this, right? Part of the administration thing was me. But I got pulled over one time, and I worked at a bar as well as at another job. And at my bar job, I was the guy responsible for like, hey, lost phone, see if you can get it back to the person. Hey, license, a stack of licenses and credit cards this big. So I had all this stuff, and I get pulled over because they're
Oh
like, run my
no.
plate, and it was like
Identity
this.
theft
Oh
and
yeah,
yeah.
got cuffed
Oh
up, and
God.
on my way to my regular job, I got put in the pokey for a minute, until I could luckily bail myself out, which also is a bullshit thing. And the
Hmm.
whole thing was crazy. And I'm like, I work in a bar. You called my boss. He confirmed I work in a bar. That's
Right.
why I have these licenses. I'm trying to look right next to the licenses. It's a stack of envelopes and a roll of stamps my boss also gave me to return these things. Didn't matter. I had to go through a whole roll. And when you're a turner and you speak English, you are the last guy that they see in that day in court. And guess who's absolutely tired of seeing people in front of him by the time you get to TU?
Everybody. But yes, his honor. So what
Yeah.
happened?
And there's a penalty for that too. Like just alphabetically, there's a penalty.
That's
I'm
what
not
I
even
have
lying.
not heard. But yeah, I can see how that would happen.
Yeah, because you'd watch and you'd watch and you'd watch and you'd watch and like he's getting madder. Oh my God, and then next
Oh
thing you know,
no.
the only way out of this, and you don't want to, but what you realize in retrospect is just take the $800 hit and the misdemeanor, whatever they want to give you, and because it's already a better deal than what you're going to get. And I literally did nothing wrong. I was trying to do people a favor.
And it costs you so much money to fight it because you have to take
Oh
time
my
off
God.
work. You have
Yeah.
to do like and that stuff. I don't know what we can do anything about. I don't know, but there
Yeah.
are things we can fix. And I mean, the whole process, the things that we put people through when they get involved,
Yeah.
like criminal justice involvement, like it's. I remember I had a judge who used to this many years ago who would just become irate if a defendant was 5 minutes late for court, and then he would actually bucket people, and that's like public defender speak for throw them in jail for.
Mhm.
He just lock them up and they show up late, and I'm thinking they have no idea what it took that person who is homeless or whatever their situation was, a single mother, whatever it was, to get to court. Like even just they don't just get in their car and drive
Yeah.
down there and pay the $20. Like they have to take 4 buses and they have to have money for the bus, and then
Mhm.
there's all these things that they don't even consider or didn't back then. And then if they plead guilty, and they used to charge all this money for probation, so you owe $3,000 to probation for the honor of being
Yeah.
your probation. I just that the fines and fees aspect of criminal justice are sort of shocking as well, because
It is
we're
shocking.
making all this money on the backs of really poor people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be all that fair. to
In
me.
my case, I worked in one county, lived in another, right? And so I kept getting pulled over in both counties, and like things were stacking. And there
Ugh.
was a problem 3 ways. You had the police problem, you had the court problem, and then you had the state. And the state and the court did not get along, and they wouldn't communicate in a way that made any kind of sense. And so they'd say, hey, send your packet down. And I'm like, oh, I'll go get the paperwork. And they're like, no, you can't send it. The court has to send it. And the court would go, I already sent it. And I'm like, okay, but they don't have it. So one day I got the papers in a way that they wanted it, sent it to Karen Nash, certified mail, stamped, received. I call up, did you get it? What are you talking about? I'm like, I've got a stamp, receipt, certified mail, all the way downstate, 6 hours away, that you have my court papers. Well, I don't have them.
Ugh.
Hang up. So in one county, the judge sees the pattern, and she's like, oh my God, you poor thing. I recognize you. You've been in here so many times. Show me every case. They're all the same. She's like, wipe all of them out in Lake County, Illinois, right? In McHenry County, the judge thought I was public enemy number one.
Wow.
And it was ridiculous, right? And here I am. I'm trying to work with the system, and I don't have a lot of money, but I got enough to maybe fight this. But it's all of my extra money is going to this thing. And hiring lawyers did no good because this was a procedural administrative problem, right? And now imagine if you have any level less of like ability to avoid court. Like I show up in a suit. They always think I'm a lawyer when I come in. They're like, "Oh, well, who do you work for?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm here for. I'm the guy they're talking to." But if you don't have all those things,
yeah.
I mean, I easily could have been in jail. Every time I got pulled over, it got worse and worse. My bail got higher because they thought, well, this guy isn't learning his lesson. I had a piece of paper from the state saying, hey, your license is reinstated because obviously you have insurance and your registration is good. Everything's good. Next paragraph. And this is all boilerplate. It's not real, right? No one typed this thing up. It said, because you don't have insurance, your license and registration are suspended. The same document.
Crazy making.
I know. And so you show it to the cop and he's like, well, listen, I already called it in. I have to take you in. And you're like, oh my God, I couldn't get off this train. I had to move out of Illinois. And so I use me as an example.
You out.
Right. I use me as an example because I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. But the more I was looking over my shoulder every time I drove anywhere to make sure I didn't get my plate run. And I still had to drive. I still had to live my life. Right. And so it's so easy to see how someone with any less money or any less time or any kind of drug, anything.
To say any less ability to function. Like a lot of times the system asks too much of people who really can't. They just don't have the ability. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So from from the smallest little administrative things to, life without parole sentences, there's so much opportunity for reform. And you know what, though, I'm starting to really see it. It's my first time in my career that I've actually really starting to see criminal justice reform. Also the stuff PDs have been saying forever. We know we talk a lot about police abuses. And by the way, I sort of differ from most of my friends, my very left-wing friends, in that I'm not anti-police, or I don't want to be political about any of it, but we know about police abuses, right? We've been seeing it for a long time. And now that we have cell phone cameras, everybody believes us now, because they've seen it with their own two eyes. But imagine, 15 years ago, nobody would have believed that the officers involved in, say, the George Floyd murder, they wouldn't have believed that if it hadn't been on video. So it's just a whole new world, and there's good and bad with it. But we are seeing reform, and I every day I work on cases where the clients I'm helping, I'm only able to help them because the laws have changed. So there are some positives.
There is.
We just need more.
There's a very notable multi-homicide case where the person has been tried. You wait for it. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
3 times for the same crime.
Wow.
Yeah. One was thrown out. One was thrown out. One was like mistrial. He was convicted mistrial. The next one, they're like, you're innocent. And then he got tried federally through the universal.
I was going to say, how could they do that after an innocence a not guilty finding?
And he's one of like 2 people to ever have this happen to him, right? And look, I'm not saying this is a cut and dry case, right? But under one of the victim's fingernails is not his DNA. And they won't test it because of procedural thing, like, hey, we don't have money for it, and there's no viable appeal for that.
Have to test it. That's crazy.
It is crazy.
What state are we talking about?
Well, it's military court.
Oh, I know nothing about that. Okay.
Yeah. So
I don't know the rules. Totally different rules.
Right. To be fair and clear, because I got to say this, the guy who's convicted, his semen is in the vagina of one of the people that he killed. So there is some complexities in this case, right?
Yeah, there are complexities in DNA that I think a lot of people don't realize. I remember, like, this was in San Francisco. There was, I can't believe I forgot the name of this amazing attorney, but there was a case not too long ago where it was a home invasion murder, and they found DNA. It was a speck of DNA somewhere on one of the victims' bodies, and they had a match. And so they arrest the guy. And through great lawyering, they found out. And this guy was like, I did not do this crime. I'm innocent. I'm innocent. And the lawyer listened. And it turned out that they could show that this was transfer DNA because one of the paramedics who arrived at the scene of the homicide had seen this defendant in a clinic hours before. So he transferred DNA from this person onto the body that he was attending to at the scene, and they were able to prove that. And the DA obviously dismissed the case. But I mean, I just found that case fascinating because for the longest time, people were like, well, DNA, it's going to solve everything. And it's not always the case. Not always the case. You have to be careful with that.
It's the thing. Like, these things are also complex. There's a case down here in Southern California where all of a sudden they realize, hey, this medical examiner, his semen sample was in the victim, and they're like, it's him. And he's like, it wasn't me. It's not me. And it turns out, they would use their semen sample as a control or whatever, and it got cross-contaminated. That dude killed himself.
I remember this case, San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah.
Horrifying.
Right.
Horrifying case. I was,
And then you talk about reform. We routinely exonerate people via DNA evidence who are on death row, and yet we still have, I can't believe it. We still have capital punishment.
Oh, don't get me started on that. It infuriates me. I mean, you don't even have to talk about the morality of killing someone who really, deserves it. You don't have to go there. You just need to know the system. And if you still support the death penalty and you know how faulty our system is, I can't wrap my head around that. Like, I understand supporting the death penalty in theory. I understand people who are all for that kind of retribution. I mean, I don't know if I'm one of those people or not. I like to think no, but I don't have any argument with people who want that and when their family's been victimized. But I do have a problem with knowing the system the way it is and saying, oh, let's keep this in place. I mean, we know that innocent people will be executed and have been executed if we continue to do this. So to me, it's a no-brainer. You just can't, I don't trust the government to do very much at all. I certainly don't trust them to execute someone, and be sure.
And the next time a cop or a DA decides that this is the guy and they're foot stomping mad about it and everything else, and it turns out they're absolutely wrong, it will not be the first, won't be the last. It'll continue to happen. Like, we as humans believe something passionately, and then you will stop looking for anybody else. You will only look for reasons for this innocent person, and we will ruin that person's lives. And I'm thinking right now about Vallejo, where that lady was kidnapped and raped repeatedly and taken for days and days. And then she gets released. She gets back to Vallejo, and Vallejo's like, it's a hoax, and says so on national TV. Vallejo PD, the lead detective, says it's a hoax, and it was not a hoax.
Right.
And then
happened a lot more than we are comfortable with, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it depends on the victim. A lot. I mean, just look at this whole. Everyone's up in arms about the Jeffrey Dahmer Netflix show, and they're saying it's abusive to the victims. I'm thinking the opposite. I really enjoyed that series, and I'll tell you why. I was so happy to hear and see someone actually talk about how this subject of bias, if we're going back to implicit bias, it can be deadly, right? So that child, that 14-year-old child who had brown skin and who the police were told was gay, they put that child back into Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment to be murdered and eaten. And if you think that would have happened, if we're talking about a pretty little 14-year-old blonde girl and an adult male, there's no way. I mean, then there's no way the police officers would have taken that child and put them back in the offender's control. And, oh, by the way, he was also bleeding from the head. I mean, come on, right? I mean, that's how we know that bias can be deadly. And so, I think a lot of times victims don't get listened to when they report crimes like that.
I want to get back to the death penalty thing too, because I agree with you that, when we have to either accept that we're going to kill innocent people in an effort to kill someone that is maybe the guilty person, Or you have to say, hey, we really have to be very, very selective. And there's some obvious times when it is appropriate. Like um, this was a couple of years back. There were two executions in one night, and I'm not sure if the other one happened. I think it did, but one was one of these questionable calls. It was a black dude. He had lived a very dangerous life that put himself in the spotlight when these kind of things happen, and that's 100% true. Like he didn't. He was. This guy was not an angel, but
Right. Well, people usually aren't when they get
yeah,
caught up in the system.
exactly. Did he do it? We don't know. The other guy was from Texas, hooked up an adult black male to the back of his car and
I
drugged that
remember.
person to death,
I
right?
remember
And
that
so the
case.
same night, no vigil at the one guy's place because we all agree the other guy's got to go away. Like nobody wants that to happen. And so maybe there are circumstances, but I can forego that circumstance
Yeah.
to make sure that we don't kill an innocent person.
Same.
I can get
Yeah.
away with it. I've got extra tax dollars to house that person.
Yeah. I feel like we have to make that decision at some point in our country. And
Yeah.
I can't, I try to understand everybody and where people come from. And I just can't understand accepting that there's going to be some innocent person. Can you imagine being innocent of a crime, being locked up and strapped down to a gurney and have the government inject you with, I mean, I can't imagine a horror show worse than that. That's just unbelievable. It's just, it's unthinkable. But we're not there yet. We're getting there.
Yeah, we're not there yet. Yeah. These are the things that are problems, but and it's such a complex thing. And it's easy to beat on the police, but the reality is that Oakland is such a crap place to work. And there's not just the crime aspect, which is high, but there's also the political aspect. And like, hey, I'm trying to raise a family. I can't even buy a house for fear of anything happening. I've got to live at, and so Oakland, they can't hire enough cops. And here's the thing is you can go there, they'll hire almost anybody they can get in and qualify. And then you're like, I'm qualified. And guess what? Pew, I'm out, because why would you stay in Oakland in this highly combative cauldron,
Yeah. I don't know what to make of that, but I've always sort of, I don't know. I know it's a terribly tough job. A lot of trauma, and so is mine, although I don't get shot at. But I know it's a terribly tough job, and I have a great respect for people who do it and do it well. But at the same time, I feel like we have to have accountability within law enforcement communities. Like the day that law enforcement officers stand up and say that guy is a bad cop and he needs to go, I think that's the day we're going to have more support for the police. I think a lot of the community's distrust and a lot of the anger comes from people saying, well, it's only a few bad apples. The statistics might not support that, but even if it does, it's the fact that you have to do something about your bad apples. You can't just ignore it. And I think the community is just really tired of seeing abuses just go unanswered. So I agree that we need to support our police and help them do their job better, but we also need to ask them in return to not bury the truth or test a lie or cover for other police officers who've done bad deeds, because I think the bad cops actually endanger the good ones. I don't know. That's just the way I look at it.
It's also an impossibly hard job. And
we
probably, well, look, first off, police officers see people, and you do too, in what you do, but they're right there in the moment, like the worst moment in someone's life, whether they've made this decision, they've made this mistake, they've realized, they're there all the time and they take that damage, and there's just, it's unrelenting, and you have to go back out to work. And if not you, then someone else has to go and get their life ruined. And so that bottle of pills, that bottle of booze, whatever it is, starts to help out with all of these things. It's an incredibly complex job. And when you see someone, and I'm not justifying bad behavior, right? But like, the guy in Minnesota, Philandro Castro, I think it was his name was, he was licensed to carry a weapon. If you don't know what the briefing was before, you don't know what that license plate thing read, you key the wrong number in and a whole sheet comes. I mean, you don't know what they're walking into, and they certainly don't know what they're walking into. And I know that I behave completely differently around police. my hands are, here's my hands. I got pulled over by the Border Patrol with some friends of mine in several cars in a convoy. And the first car got pulled over. So we pulled over with them and spaced ourselves back. And they thought they were going to get ambushed, the Border Patrol, right? So they came out guns
Oh,
ready. But both of us kept our hands on the wheel so you could see. And they're like, why did you do that? And I'm like, well, we're together and I'm looking out for my friend. They're like, it looks like you guys are doing something tactical. I'm like, looks like you're doing something tactical.
Yeah.
So
It looks like you're doing something tactical.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Haven't they seen people get pulled over and put their hands on? I mean, even I do that.
Yeah.
I've never had an officer pull a gun on me.
They meant about our pulling over to look out for our friend in the other vehicle, the hands up part. But, the thing is they were telling us, like, this is a dangerous area. We don't know what we're running up in. And we're like, yeah, it's the same thing for us.
Okay.
Maybe you guys are legitimately Border Patrol with these wonderful Border Patrol cars. Maybe you got whacked 20 minutes ago and someone else is going to do an illegal. We don't know. No one knows. All right. And so I can feel for police and what they have to walk into. But, and look, if you're a young dude making bad decisions, putting yourselves in these situations, you are allowing a system that is struggling to do better to be in charge of your future, and so there's some element of that. But gosh, I don't know. So what percentage of people do you think are not I'm not saying that they're guilty of the crime, but even if they're like, doing bad things and trending towards that crime, what percentage of them though have not done the crime and or should be handled a lot less severely by the court system?
I mean, I can't give you a number.
I know.
I can say this. Almost every case that I was assigned to when I was a trial attorney was at the very least overcharged.
Okay.
So, and that's part of our system. That's built in. That's not anybody's fault. I mean, it can be fixed, but I'm not blaming a single individual for that. But I'll give you an example, okay? I had a case where this kid, he was 12 years old. And this was when I worked in the juvenile courts. And he was in one of those large inner city classrooms, and he had ADHD and some other behavioral problems. And he's in this large classroom, and he was frustrated. And he took his notebook and threw it in the direction of his teacher. Do you want to guess what happened to the kid? Oh, he's a young Black kid. He was arrested, and charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Okay, this is a true story. So, was he innocent? I mean, in this case, probably yes. But what I'm trying to say if this had been a young white kid from an affluent part of Los Angeles, there would have been no charge in the first place. He would have been sent to the principal's office and told, don't throw your notebook in the direction of your teacher. Do you need help? Do you need counseling? What can we do for you? Are things okay at home? But that doesn't happen when you're a young Black kid in the inner city. So in my cases, I think largely overcharged. And I would say almost 100%. That kind of overcharging, where if there's a crime, it certainly isn't the crime they're charged with. I can't tell you how many times I would go to trial with, the guy's guilty of X, but not X, Y, Z, P, D, and Q. And I think the reason they do that is to push pleas, which is another thing that needs some talking about. Because like you said, a lot of times people just plead guilty because they want to get out of jail or because they can't afford financially to take time off work and come to trial. I can't tell you how many times I used to plead with a client to not take a deal because they were innocent. But they just were like, listen, Miss Nash, I got to get to work or I'm not going to feed my family.
Right.
So take a deal, even though it was they offer a lesser charge and they plead so they could get out or so that they wouldn't have to take 2 weeks off of work to go to trial.
Yeah.
So the almost all of them were overcharged. As far as factual innocence, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Definitely more than I would have thought before I was a offender. A lot of eyewitness identification problems, like where people were being prosecuted for a crime based on solely the testimony of someone saying, oh, that was the guy.
Right.
So no physical evidence, no forensic evidence, just eyewitness identification, which we now know is worth just about zero. I mean, it's essentially worthless.
And the stuff we've learned about confessions, it's shocking.
That's another area of science where science has really helped criminal defense.
Can I just say out loud to everybody across the world, if you get in a situation where the law is going to talk to you, instantly ask for a lawyer.
Yeah, STFU. Okay.
Yeah,
Shut the fuck up. There was
absolutely. Don't say
a bunch
anything.
of lawyers in LA who were primarily marijuana lawyers, when
Mhm.
that used to be illegal. Remember those times?
Right. Yeah.
And they used to do this thing. It was called "Shut the Fuck Up Fridays," and they did every Friday. They did a little video on why you should shut the fuck up if you're ever under suspicion for a crime, and they were
Right.
hilarious. I just
Yeah.
kept thinking, I really want to get arrested for pot so that these guys can represent me. And but anyway, shut the fuck up Fridays. Yeah, and there's also, I wish I could remember the name of this guy, a guy who
Yeah.
gave a really great. It was a law professor, and it's somewhere on the interwebs.
Yeah.
He gave a talk, a long lecture on why you should remain silent if you're suspected of a crime, and it's fascinating. It really gets into it because we don't like to think that. We think, oh, if we're innocent and we just tell our story, it'll be fine. But by the time you are in an interrogation room, they think you're guilty. They think you're guilty, and there's nothing you're going to say. They're there to talk to you so that they can build their case. They're not there to talk to you so that they can, hear that you are just have the IDs because you work in a bar, and
Right.
they're not. The thing that they get out of that statement that you just made is, I have those IDs.
Right.
Now you've just implicated yourself,
Yep.
right? That's what they're trying. That's the information they're trying to get, and that's good detective work. I'm not knocking it. That's smart, and I would do it too if I was a detective. But that's why you shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing. You're not going to help yourself by talking.
You should really make friends with a really good lawyer. My buddy Blake is an excellent lawyer, and he would routinely twist up other lawyers in court, especially on appeal. And he got pulled over one night for drunk driving in Indiana, where he lives. And he's like, I'm a lawyer in this state, and I'm begging you to take me to jail right now, please, because I'm going to put you in there on the stand, and I'm going to fuck you up. And the guy was like, you know what? On second thought, have a nice night.
I've never heard of that working.
Oh, yeah. He just went right after him. He's like,
he's
please
a unicorn. He's the one guy who's talked himself out of an arrest.
Yeah, by threatening him, like, please put me in court because I'm going to come after you so hard.
I would think the second you open your pie hole and say you're a lawyer, especially if you say criminal defense, like, you're going to have cuffs on you so fast. I'm surprised that worked.
Yeah. We're going to struggle with this thing as a society because, look, hard on crime, soft on crime. We can't seem to figure that out. Rehabilitation, punishment. Can't seem to figure that out.
Why does it have to be this or that? Why can't we just look at what works, do that, and know that there are going to be exceptions?
You sound like a no good hippie now. I don't like it.
I know.
Right? I mean, that's what happens. We shut each other down. And I'm mocking the thing where we can't listen, right?
Right.
But what is working, and where is there more work needed?
Well, we know that putting people in prison for life for nonviolent or sort of one-off offenses doesn't work. It doesn't deter someone from committing a crime. So we know that. We know that death penalty, LWOP, life without parole, those things don't work as deterrents. So we know that that's a fact. No person who commits an offense is sitting there thinking, what's going to happen to me if I commit this offense? Like, especially not impulsive type of crimes. So we just know that doesn't work. Then we have the question of the whole morality thing. Well, do we lock someone up and throw away the key for this offense, or what about this offense? And I think we really have to look at case by case, but we have to stop relying on really, really long prison terms, because no one's the same at 18 as they are at 45. So we know that. And I think we need to be more honest about what dangerousness looks like. I hate to say this, it's like that Supreme Court case, when you see it, right, about pornography.
Yep.
I can't remember the name of the case, but I can look at.
You're the worst at remembering.
I can look at a rap sheet, and I can be like, this guy is not dangerous. This is a guy who's a drug addict who steals stuff. He's not dangerous. I could tell.
Right.
But I don't know. I just think that we need to have a better way in society of, yes, we need to lock someone up when they're still in that period of, I'm going to keep committing crimes over and over again.
Yeah.
We don't need to throw away the key. So we need to have an opportunity for parole, I think, in most cases. Now, if we're talking about sadistic, sexual homicides, people who rape children, those kind of crimes, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm pretty sure those people are not rehabilitatable. And those are and why do we have to make decisions based on the minority of
Right.
offenses. Like those are so rare. I know it's the kind of thing we read about, and
Yeah, it's salacious.
I personally am a crime junkie, right? I watch. My husband always says, "Don't you get enough of this at work?" And I'm like, "No, I have to watch every podcast, every Netflix show."
Yeah.
But we shouldn't make decisions based on the fact that there are going to be these anomalies. These, what is it, like 1% or something?
This is a great point. We tend to focus on what I call the wiggly end of the bell curve. Like, you see it flatten out, but way out there at the edges, that's funky stuff. And you can't predict, you can't legislate, you can't policy those things out of existence. Random shit is going to happen. The guy from Rolling Stone who wrote that hit piece on Stanley McChrystal, the general in Afghanistan that got Stanley fired, that guy dies in an accident where his brakes failed, but he was not murdered. Right. Like, come on. Like these things happen, and you look at the coincidences and everything else. It's a mad world. I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I'm always curious about, because other countries handle justice in a different way, right? Like a lot of countries don't even
what they do.
Right. Yeah. So there's countries that don't have a penal system, because why would you want to pay for all that shit? Right. And they handle it civilly, and they have sometimes civilly, but sometimes not civilly.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? Yes. In other places, they're like, hey, rehabilitation is so important. We're going to fail on the end of like trying too hard to rehabilitate, to the tune of like, we're going to spend a bunch of money to make sure this person it does well when they get out. And let me use an example. During the Prison Chronicles, when I was talking with these guys, they're like, think about this. Like, you've struggled your whole life. You do this long prison sentence and you're desperate to get out, and then door shuts behind you and you're out. And you're like, yes. And then you realize, oh my God.
Shit, I have no life skills.
Yeah. What am I going to do? Yeah. Right. How am I going to afford this? I can't live in my county because I murdered someone there. And all these other things happen. And the guy's like, you're terrified, and you see all your friends coming back all the time, and you're like, now I have to. And then you get into this limbic response of fight, flight, freeze. You don't know what to do. Right.
Well, that's why I think at the beginning of this talk we were discussing resources that need to be available. If there are other countries who, from the very moment someone goes to prison, the goal, they start right then. Right from the day they walk in the door, they start trying to make sure they're not going to reoffend. And our prison system is just awful. We send people out worse than they were when they went in, for the most part. And that doesn't help anyone. And I'm not talking about coddling people who committed crimes, although I'm a softie and I do want to coddle everyone. But you don't even have to think that way. You have to think, what's the best way to keep our community safe? And
one of the guys,
the answer to that is to let people out of prison with some support and and having actually helped them in some way.
We put a lot of weight on people that don't have the shoulders to take it too, and young people. Right. And so we're like, you need to step up and be responsible. So one of the guys was involved in a murder that we had on the Prison Chronicles. And he's like, I didn't murder the person, but I definitely walked into her house with my friends. She died from our actions, and I did not intend to do her well. So I deserved the 20 plus years that I got. And one of the things he said was to have avoided that, because he and I happened to habitate the same neighborhood, not exactly the same time, but within 24 months of each other. Right. And he, and the thing is because I'm a combat guy, I heard him telling his story, and I'm like, I've heard this story before. And it was my buddy Johnny Walker, who's an Iraqi interpreter, and his wife was accosted by gangs, which is what the Taliban and Al Qaeda, these things are gangs to them, right? It was the exact same story, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the same thing for these guys, right? This link between combat zones and Sacramento, and you wouldn't think that was true in Sacramento, but you go in the wrong neighborhood, and there you are,
sir.
And so
I wouldn't have known that till I worked juvie, and these kids are they're like combat veterans. They've seen shit that I can't even imagine by the time they're 13.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many links with that. It's a big part of the Prison Chronicles. But one of the things he said, because I asked him, I said, okay, so how big are the shoulders, right? Like, you have this ability to rap. It turned out he was a fantastic rapper and made money all through prison, rapping into a prison phone. Someone recorded it, and he made money, which made him kind of a problem for the system because he could now fund all of his gang members' lifestyles in prison, and whenever he got transferred, it was good for, so it was a whole other thing. But I said, how hard would it have been for you to avoid it and just go focus on music? And he's like, yeah, it takes three things. It's like an incredible person who's relentless and won't let it up. You've got to be incredible yourself, and you need an incredible circumstance. And those three things have to work together to allow you the opportunity to say, actually, this is going to work, because everything else is pulling you back, and everything about your society that you're in is drawing life out of you. It's teaching you that your life is not valuable.
Yes.
And you're like, God, that's not what we it makes me emotional. That's not what we want for any young kid. I don't care what color they are. We don't want any young person who maybe doesn't have enough money, doesn't have enough non-dangerous activities to do, that they end up in these circumstances, and it requires that much of a.
They have to continue being that way because no one's helping them get out of that. And it's especially with the gang culture. I mean, in order to get out of a gang when you're in prison, you're risking your life, and I don't know what the answer is to that. I really don't. But I know that whatever we're doing, it's not working. It's just not working. Our prisons are so dangerous and cruel. And it just doesn't need to be that way. And it doesn't help us as a society in any way.
We've had a lot of people on the show talking about that. We had another guy who was a guard out in Corcoran, back in the whole mess of it. He's the guy that was a whistleblower for the whole thing.
Oh, I would love to meet and talk to him. Yeah. That's
okay. I'll connect you guys.
Maybe we'll read the book.
Yeah. And he's Richard Caruso is his name, and he is incredible. He talks about all of the things, and they made some movies, and then Hollywood started stealing his ideas and everything else.
The
whole thing. But just that day-to-day life, and it was dangerous for him to talk about it because the guards were there were so they were the ones that were rogue were so powerful that anybody who went against them was chewed up by wild dogs, basically, and the wild dogs were the guards. But all of these things compound this messy system where we're not getting the results that we want. And, I don't know what to do about it.
Powerful lobby too, with the prison guard union. So there's a lot of money involved too. And that you can't combine money and incarceration. I mean, all of that is just a recipe for disaster, but that's what we do. I mean, there's no incentive for the CBCR to let a nice, healthy, youngish person out of prison because they're making all this money for their budget to keep them in. Whereas if you've got somebody who's sick and old, well, maybe they can go because they're not charged. They were not costing us any money. I mean, it just, I know it's not really that corrupt, but that's how it feels. It feels like,
well, there's a lot of those feels where it feels like the streets are more dangerous. It feels like we're letting people out with violent crimes. And then no shit, there is a guy right there who gets out for whatever reason. It was his lucky day, but a lot of this thing is the specter of what might or what could or what is happening. I mean, it's a fact that there's a guy in California prison, I believe still right now, because a guy broke into his home and the homeowner, who had a little bit of a record, shot the guy, the intruder, bang, 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 and didn't kill him. And they said, hey, this guy that broke into your house, you shouldn't have shot him. And so you're going to go to prison, because he had this little bit of a colored past. And so sure enough, the guy he shot survives, recovers, breaks into somebody else's house, and is because he's a serial knife wielding rapist or something, you know? And you're like, oh my God, that's also not what we want, So it's a messy world. I don't know. Well, are we getting better? That's my question to you.
I think so in some ways, but we're as far as the things that sort of brew crime. No, we're not getting better. We're not stopping people from getting into crime. Obviously, we have a huge problem, like we said earlier, with people who are homeless and mentally ill and on drugs, and we have no real support system for them. So I don't know. I think those people need more help than we're giving them. Same with poverty. I mean, I think, definitely there's a correlation with race, right? With the disparate treatment and sentencing and all that, but it's also a poverty issue. I think people who are desperately poor are more likely to commit a theft offense than people who are not. I don't know. I'm, again, not a scientist, but I think if we improve people's lives by giving them access to quality education and healthcare, I mean, again, I'm sounding like a hippie, but Think about it. I mean, if we have a society that's not afraid of losing, their housing because they had to pay a medical bill.
Right.
I mean, I think that's something everybody wants. And I think we all want people to be as educated as they can be. So I think if we address those things and stop with I pulled out my wire here. Hang on.
Yeah.
There. Okay.
Sure. Okay.
And address oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And address over sentencing. Those are things that, and it's starting to happen. Like I was just going to say, I'm working on a case right now where, I mean, people don't believe me when I tell them this, but I have a client who got at 24 years old, was the getaway driver in a robbery. And this was a robbery with no weapons. These idiots just went into the location to rob it and came out with the money and got into my client's car and drove off. And my client caused a car accident where somebody was killed. So that is a terrible crime. But he got life without the possibility of parole.
Yeah.
This getaway driver and the other defendants who actually came up with the idea and did the robbery, those people are out.
Yeah.
So to me, there's no justice in that.
Yeah, there is no justice.
And he was a 24-year-old kid, I mean, so isn't 20 years enough? 25 years, isn't that enough for a crime like that? I don't know. I just maybe
it was like when we had the 3 strikes law. The 3 strikes law was made sense out of emotion,
Yeah.
And then you realize it was being used to put not that bad of people in jail, people that maybe needed a third chance, and sometimes, look, we're dumb. Dudes are dumb.
Dudes
and
especially.
Sometimes
young dudes.
I'm curious what you think about this too, and this is touchy, so you can feel free to back out. But we have this perception that police are corrupt, but there are so many cops that are great, and you look around at how many police shifts there are in a year, and it's like hundreds of millions, right? And there's only a very, very, like, again, one of those wiggly into the curve numbers where there's excessive use of force, where maybe there's a crime. And we're not talking like suicide by cop. We're talking about like that you shouldn't have done, right? Meanwhile, the person most likely to kill a black dude is a black dude, right? And so we have this societal problem.
But let me jump in. I'm going to jump in.
Please,
and this is why I have to jump in.
And that's why I said it's touchy, but I wanted to.
No, it's not that touchy. It actually isn't. I hear what you're saying, but I got to jump in because the difference is justice. Okay? So when someone goes out and commits a street crime, like if it's a robbery or a gang related thing, and we're talking about young black kids, let's say it's a black gang.
Yeah.
That person, sorry, this wire keeps coming undone. That person is going to be investigated, charged, sent to prison for committing that act. The difference when it's police against a citizen, especially an unarmed citizen, is that there's never any justice. And there didn't used to be. Sorry with this thing again.
Oh, no, I can't hear you. I can't hear you now. You went and fixed it and I can't hear you. Right when you're making your big point. It's the NSA. I can't hear you at all. I can't hear you.
There.
Nope. Oh, there you are. Okay.
So anyway, yeah, definitely it's a right-wing conspiracy to mute me when I was saying this, but difference, and that's what the Black Lives Matter movement was about. It wasn't saying that these other, there's handgun violence in our inner cities. And yes, it's true that in a gang, if you're talking about a black gang, it's going to be black people shooting other black people, or in a Hispanic gang, shooting other, that's a separate issue. That's crime, right? Okay. We deal with crime, and I think we deal with it pretty harshly, but we don't deal with injustice from the government. So we don't deal with, and I say the government, the police, the government, come after someone and use excessive force. There's no justice. So we can aim to stop. Yes, we can aim to stop the bad thing from happening. But like we already determined, right? There's going to be some shit. There's going to be a bad cop. There's going to be a cop who is a good person but does a bad thing. Just like when I have a client who's a good person and does a bad thing, and they have consequences. My clients do. So I think the police need to have consequences, even if it's just you shouldn't be a police officer for a while. If it's a minor thing, to when someone commits a murder, they need to be prosecuted for murder. So that's the difference for me. There's just no justice involved when it's from the government, the excessive force.
Let me hit the ball back to you one time real quick with this. And again, this is because it's a conversation. So I want to ask, a lot of these inner city murders, they're not solved, partly because of the lack of trust between that community and then the system that would provide the justice. So there's also a lack of justice there. And that number is greater. I mean, it's a bold statement to say that there are more gang related murders than police related injustice murders, but it's just a fact, right? And so we know that these numbers are out there. Is that a worse injustice that we're not able to bridge that mistrust gap to get more evidence so we can say, hey, this person killed this person, instead of, hey, this person was killed, murdered, and we don't have the resources to keep up with it because there's been 10 since that one happened last month.
I'm not going to buy that the police don't have resources to investigate murders in a big city. Maybe in a smaller community, I would buy that, but not in Los Angeles. They have plenty of resources. Whether or not a crime is solvable is kind of out of my wheelhouse. I don't know. Right. Well, maybe it's not. But I mean, anytime a homicide goes unprosecuted, that's a problem, right? And it's injustice. But it's not because the government is saying, we're not even going to look. And in fact, we're going to allow the people who did the crime to investigate themselves. That's what happens on the other side of this. So these are two separate issues: crime versus, excessive force. And
part of that problem is that separation between the community and the police, right? And the community and the courts. The courts aren't trust.
I don't know. I mean, the people I know who've been victimized want their cases solved and want to work with the police. But I suppose if you're telling me that, then you must have some basis for that. So if that exists, then we do need to work on fixing it. But I don't think that's I don't think we're just not getting homicides cleared because the victims don't want the homicides cleared.
Well, maybe not the victims, but maybe the community, that unwillingness to talk, putting themselves in danger, that kind of thing,
Yeah, I mean, that does exist, but that exists in any situation. I don't think that's unique to inner city violence. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I know we can do better on all fronts. I don't know everything. I was wrong once in 1976,
Do better, Karen. Come on. Yeah, it's
I'm trying to hear the responses in my head of people who work on justice matters in our inner cities, and I don't think that they would agree with you that the problem is the victims not helping the police.
But and again, I don't want to keep pushing, and I'm not trying to have an argument with you at all.
No, I love it. I like to be challenged.
So when you go out and talk to people who aren't talking to people in the government, what are they saying? They're like, F those people. Those people don't care about me. And if you start with that basis, that absolutely is a thing. And I can go out around LA and go find that right now. Go to the right neighborhood.
But
and it's tell me
truth to those crimes aren't as there aren't as much resources placed. Like, I mean, a perfect example. Look at we had the Grim Sleeper case. I mean, there were prostitutes, people of color. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say sex workers now, who were murdered. And this went on for a really long time. And we all know, again, that if this had happened in Beverly Hills and the victims were, women, lawyers, and stockbrokers, we would have had more resources and more. And I'm not bagging on the police here. I'm talking about media resources, everything. So again, I don't agree that that there's any truth to cases are not being solved in the inner city because of victims.
And also, in your defense,
I'm not going to agree with you on that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And these are big, complex topics.
I'll allow that it's possible.
For sure. And the other thing is funny, like Beverly Hills, right? We use them as an example, or Brentwood, or any of these nice neighborhoods. If you want to find out how hard it is to park somewhere, go to these neighborhoods and try to park, right? And why? Well, okay, so the security people are like, hey, I know a bunch of cops. It's dangerous to have you park in front of Sting's house. We're going to put a big hedge up, but nobody's allowed to park there, And because they've got influence, nobody parks. There's signs everywhere. No parking, no parking, no parking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all are going to agree there's benefits to being wealthy and famous.
Yeah. So they have the ability to do these things, and they can hire their own detectives and all these other. Anyhow, blah blah blah. We talked for over an hour, and you've been awesome sport with it.
You've been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and look, we can't. We're not done having these conversations, right? We have to figure this out. We have to figure out how to. One guy that we loved having on the show, his name is Devon Bogan. He created a program called Advanced Peace, and whenever they write about it in the news, they write paying criminals to not commit crime.
Yeah, I watched your show on that. Yeah.
It's amazing to me. It's like, here's something that's working. Maybe it's not the perfect answer, but they're case managing these kids
and it is
out of crime, and some of them end up viable humans.
Yeah, and you're getting these people before they become my clients, and that's what I want. I don't want
right. Yeah.
It's just wonderful young kids who just have the lives that you couldn't even imagine. And if someone wants to reach out and help them, we should be supporting that.
We should be. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on. Anything in closing?
No, I got nothing. Thanks for helping me get my tech together, and thanks for a really interesting conversation and for having a difficult conversation about criminal justice issues, because a lot of people don't even want to talk about it, and they certainly don't want to hear it from a defense attorney. So I appreciate it.
I'm going to say this one last thing before we go. Corrections officers are terrified to talk about themselves and their institution. They are part of the problem. There you go. Pete said that right now live. All right. I'm going to roll these credits. Stand by 1 second. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank